Hi everyone, welcome to the autumn's edition of Women Textile Summit. Today I would like to talk to you about the topic which you can see on the screen. It's related to the concept of why the story written is not always the same as the story done. And as business analysts, how you can define a clear finish line, whether to think of a story as written or done. We'll explore my four-pillar band model, and I will talk to you about this a bit later. And I will also show you some lightweight artifacts that can support this concept and help you practically accomplish this concept. And the goal here is to have a repeatable way to handle features that are truly ready to build. So before we start, I'd like just to mention a few words about myself. My name is Nastassia. I'm a senior business analyst with several years of experience in IT in general, and mainly I worked in e-commerce and fintech domains. As you can see, I try to be an active contributor to the BA community. Currently, I serve as an editorial lead for IABA Poland chapter, and I always try to be active at publishing articles about my experiences and lessons learned. And also, I'm engaging in speaking opportunities at different international conferences and events. So with that said, let's just review the agenda that we have for today. I'll start with the common pinpoints of what story written means in reality, and the spoiler here, it's not the same as a story done, as most of the people consider. Then I'll introduce my band framework and show the four pillars of this concept, and this will be my lens, how I see the requirements, and how, as a BA, I think that you should also see new requests and features from this moment. And also we'll try to have to introduce a few lightweight artifacts that it's so-called small toolkit for BAs to match the pillars. The core of the session will be an end-to-end journey of the new feature requests that I got recently on one of the e-commerce projects I had. And we'll all close with the collaboration benefits that this framework can bring to the team, and generally for you to understand why you should introduce this concept. And I will also share a few key takeaways so that you can have the summary in your head when you leave the session, and there will be also a time for your questions. Let's start. In many teams, as I've seen from my experience, a story in Jira was treated as the finish line for the BA work. Most of the stakeholders considered that a business analyst's goal, main purpose and main responsibility was to craft a user story, add some description in Jira, and maybe attach a few screenshots. Basically, that was the common approach we used previously on one of my projects. But most of them expensive surprises, such as defects, rework, scope churn, come from implicit assumptions. So most people didn't explicitly mention business rules, and they lived in someone's head. Edge cases were skipped, we didn't articulate them clearly, and quality constraints we often forgot to mention. That's why story written is not something as story done. In my understanding, and I believe this should be the general concept of the BA work, that done is when the team has a shared testable understanding of what we are building. And the rest of this talk is about making that understanding explicit, so fast and light, so that you can apply all these techniques and artifacts I will be talking about in agile environments. I call this framing band BA's notion of done. The ingredients are familiar, but the packaging and gate are what makes it operational. So we don't chase documents; we pursue sufficiency here. So you will see 4 blocks of this concept, and the first one is intent. So if intent is clear, rules are explicit and owned by someone. Scenarios, including negative paths, alternative paths, are articulated well, and our quality constraints are visible. Then we're truly ready to build something, right? To proceed with the development. Otherwise, I think that we should hold the line, close the gaps before we can move forward. So this is basically the concept, right? Now I would like to have so that you can imagine how I treat these 4 pillars. So basically, this is my lens or my perspective, how I apply to every request, every new feature that comes in, to decide whether my analysis is sufficient, whether it's something that it's the exact moment I should stop, continue my analysis, and can proceed with handing off this request of features of development or not. So I literally ask, do we understand intent? I mean, the user, the outcome, the signals of success. Are the business rules explicit and owned by someone? This is quite important because if we don't know the owner of the rules, we don't know why the system has a particular behavior. At the same time, I'm wondering whether we have described the scenarios, not only the happy path, but the error and edge cases. And finally, are the quality gates in place? I mean, are the acceptance criteria understood, and do they cover all the particular, all the specific areas and like variants of the application's behavior? Whether we have meaningful data examples so that we can see clearly, and for example, importantly, quality assurance team can have some data examples to get the understanding of what the expected result is, right? The non-functional requirements, whether they are captured somewhere because they may influence the design. So if any pillar is weak, we are not done. This is basically the concept, right? The theory. And above all of these 4 pillars, from what you can see on the slide, we have the gate. This is a simple go or no go checkpoint that asks, do these pillars together give us a shared testable understanding right now? So if yes, we proceed with the development. If not, I advise that we should fix the gap before we hand off, because otherwise we will just continue moving forward these ambiguous requirements, which may later result in negative surprises for us. So let's just quickly check. Just think in your head, where would your next feature or new request land on this complexity risk grid? Low, medium, or high? The slide shows a tiny toolkit mapped to the pillars you've just seen. So let's review it. So for example, if you have quite straightforward request or feature, and you understand that the risk of developing it, or there is no way to understand it incorrectly, right? It's very low. This risk is quite low. You should prepare just a story and create concise list of acceptance criteria to understand, because these artifacts are enough to understand the intent. If you have a case when the project is more complex, or the risk of making something not right is higher, then you should apply a bit different lens. You should apply scenarios and rules pillar, because this is something that can show you how the potential application, service, or product might work. And to help you with this, as a BA, you can create a lightweight business rule map or a visual flow that will help you to gain this understanding. But just to mention a small note, that this doesn't mean that at medium complexity and risk projects, you create only visual flow and business rule map. No, you should also remember about the previous level here, about the intent, so about user store and acceptance criteria, plus visual flow and lightweight business rule map. So if we move to the next part, when we have high risk and high complexity of the project, this means that I advise you to create the comprehensive acceptance criteria matrix, the full rule map, and explicitly mention non-functional requirements, any data examples, any dependencies, and flag any risk situations or open questions you might have. Then you should run the ready to build checklist. But don't worry, I will be showing all these artifacts just in a minute. We'll also review the theory of how to create and when to use this specific artifact, and also I will show you the real example. So the principle here is fit for risk. Scale the rigor only when the feature justifies it. So it doesn't mean that you have to create all the artifacts for every feature. No, because in Agile you have a time pressure, you have some maybe budget constraints, and it's not the case to create documents just for the sake of documents, right? We should be keep this lightweight, and lightweight doesn't mean vague. It just means we do the minimum that achieves shared, testable understanding, and our end goal is to have this shared, testable understanding, and the means are the examples of these artifacts. So now I would like to just give you a bit of theory, how, if you're not familiar, how to create this, and give you maybe some practical tips of how I do this on my day-to-day basis. So what actually decides whether this behavior is allowed? The system, a threshold, or a business policy owned by someone outside engineering. If the answer isn't obvious, you need a rule map. So basically, this is a list of business rules with their IDs and owners. So you can see a format option of the potential table, how I capture the business rules. So it helps me prevent late surprises and rework by making policies explicit and owned. So, and it also helps me to speed up the decision-making process, because stakeholders clearly see what they own, and if they don't agree with someone with something, right, with one of the requirements, they can also have clarifications from the source or from the owner of these requirements. So in practice, I try to capture up to 5 or 10 rules maximum. So I have an ID, short description, owner, effective dates, notable exceptions, or any conflicts. That's it. So if a rule's owner isn't clear, we stop and assign. And because unclear ownership is a risk multiplier. And you might be wondering when to use this. So use it whenever outcomes hinge on a policy, some threshold or formula. If the product or service you are building will vary by market, by segment, by time, and dependent on roles or permissions. For example, only particular users can access this specific part of the application, right? Then if it involves such departments as you can see on the screen, like legal, marketing, or compliance, then I reference those IDs in the AC matrix. So at the high level, you'll see that policy, scenarios, and tests, they maintained aligned because they are all dependent on each other. So moving next, we'll talk about visual flow. Just imagine if we traced this feature from user action to database, right? Would everyone tell the same story if this question is asked in your team? The visual scenario flow gets us from this unknown state to this defined state in minutes. So why this artifact is suggested here? So visuals align mental models fast, and they help us reveal cross-team handoffs, failure points, and achieve to change. So you can fix a misunderstanding with one error before it becomes a sprint of rework. I try to keep the visual flow format agnostic, so it means it doesn't matter what tool you use, whether it will be any online tool for building flows diagrams, whether it will be paper and you have an in-person meeting with stakeholders, or whether you may use different notations, for example. It doesn't matter. The main goal here is to understand basically the logic or the behavior of the product or service you are trying to build, and try to keep it lightweight. So 7 or 10 nodes is enough. And usually I make it 2 or 3 lanes, have annotations of some key decisions or inputs, outputs if they are not obvious. Also, I try to capture alternatives and error paths by having by drawing dashed arrows. And using it will be helpful if you have multiple teams working on the same part of the application or the same feature, and then you have cross-team handoffs. If your product requires some asynchronous behaviors and you have like multiple retries, or there may be times out. If there are role-driven differences, or you are not sure who does what. So this is the tool that helps you understand, get this certainty about the owners, the actions, and the sequence of some actions in the process, right? So you can see the ownership and the dependencies clearly, and this will be helpful for us later in this framework. So imagine if quality assurance pasted your acceptance criteria directly into a test tool. There is a question: would those tests pass or fail ambiguously? So if not, we don't have a behavior contract yet, where this artifact is created. So I believe that acceptance criteria matrix helps us turn intent and business rules that we've already got from different stakeholders or different sources into some testable behavior to eliminate ambiguity and provide a seed for future QA test cases or even UAT. It also creates traceability. So each row references specific business rule ID that drive it. So policy and tests move together when things change. Finally, there is a place where negative and error rows are explicitly catched. They caught the issues that usually surface late. This is like the main problem of most of the projects I've worked on. So I try to keep it like here are a few tips from me. I try to keep it very lean. So 5 or 10 rows. I'm always trying to include at least one negative and one system failure pass. This is something that most teams forget. And scenario names come from the visual flow from the previous step that we discovered. When we name these scenarios the same as the visual flow steps, this helps us maintain the consistency so that all stakeholders, whoever reviews your documentation, can refer the same terms, the same notions, and everyone then speaks the same language. So I also try to point out some data examples, some maybe non-functional requirements, which I can already see from the from the flow and from the previous steps. If I have a notes column for that. I also try to ask myself whether this acceptance criteria matrix is sufficient enough, because I don't want to create a wall of prose so that no one in the team is reading that, but I try to have just to build this shared understanding. So I try to maintain some most frequent, I would say, cases, some edge cases, just to show the direction where developers and QA engineers might continue their thinking. So using acceptance criteria matrix can be beneficial if you have multiple conditions, multiple branches on your visual flow, right? So you understand that your product behavior depends on multiple conditions. You have different user roles who will access the system, or you expect some edge or error cases in production. And about the last point, you might be quite skeptical, because you might say that all products can have error cases in production. But I mean, by saying that, I mean that in your normal business logic, you expect that error cases is something I would say standard and can happen to every user. For example, if you're having an e-commerce application where the user's goal is to buy a product, so there might be a case, it's normal when the user adds the product to cart, but for some reason the product is not available. And here, this is the error case or maybe edge case, depending on what perspective you are looking from. And you should understand that this is a normal case of action, that some product is not, can't be added to the cart, or the cart service is not available right now, is down. So you should be able, as a user, you should be able to see what happens, why it happens. So ideally, maybe as a solution option, it can be for your development team to have a banner with an error saying that something happened with the cart, or this product can be accessed, can be, is not in inventory anymore, or something like that. So moving next, and that's the last point from our theory here. It's the moment where we just, as a BA, when we gathered all the information, we try to make a decision whether to proceed to hand off all the gathered information, all the requirements to the development team, or whether we are not ready to proceed the development because the ambiguity is present in the requirements still, even though we did all the previous steps. And ready-to-build checklist makes that decision explicit. So you can see on the slide, literally, this is a one-pager of items that I always try to keep, to keep track of, that all the things I captured here are understandable. And this one-pager helps me create this visual, a go, no-go gate that stops churn. It helps reduce the hidden work that might happen in the future. And it also accelerates onboarding and audits, because readiness is captured on one page. So usually I run it at the end of refinement. So when I have a list of features, user stories, however you call it, requests, I understand that intent and scenario is clear, business rules listed with owners, acceptance criteria cover happy path, edge cases, error scenarios, and the quality gates are filled. So we have some non-functional requirements mentioned. We have a few data examples. So, and we already know about any cross-team dependencies and some potential red flags that might arise in the future. So if anything is red in this or unchecked in this checklist, so we fix it now. We don't proceed with the development. If all green, we commit to build with confidence, so that the development team has all the information before the development is started. That's an important point. So let's make this real. Imagine that you're working in an e-commerce project which relates to the checkout. And the feature you're asked to analyze and then to develop is related to applying a promo code in the checkout. So historically, we know that this kind of work generated late surprises just based on our experiences from my stakeholders, from my own experience, that we often price in edge cases, pre-market rules, and error behavior was unclear and wasn't explicitly captured. So everyone in the team understood how the promo code logic should work differently. So as you can see on this slide, this is just basically a user story I started with. As a logged-in shopper, I want to apply a promo code to get a discount. Just for your context, we understand that the systems which are in scope are web application, price and promo service, and orders. And you can see that just a simple flow, how the user goes to the checkout, then on the back end, our promo price service works, and then the order can be paid for by the customer. But the main pain point here is that because the pricing logic, some edge cases were usually these are the things that are not uncovered till the last moment. Then the UAT, where the business stakeholders check how this feature works. Usually this brings us some unpleasant surprises because of these all ambiguity is still present and it wasn't eliminated at the requirements analysis stage. So here I will show you how I applied the band lens, which I hope you understood from the previous slides. We'll move through the 4 pillars: intent, rules, scenarios, and quality gates, and let the right artifacts emerge. So I will show you step by step how I created some specific artifacts. By the end, you'll see exactly what done means for this story, for this new feature that came to me, and you'll see that the team can ship it with low rework risk. That's the goal. So we start with the intent. This is our first pillar, because intent anchors every decision afterward. So who is the user? A logged in shopper. Why this feature is needed? Because the user wants to receive an eligible discount. Then we define observable success signals. For us, it means understanding how we are going to know whether this feature is implemented properly or not. So first of all, we need to see that the UI shows a discount and recalculates the total of the cart. On the order, we persist the discount source for audit internally. The system marks the code used once if policy requires. And the last point, if we emit analytics events for success and failure, so we can measure adoption and catch some potential issues in production. These are the signals that later become as then clauses in acceptance criteria and the basis for observability. If we can't state success in 4 bullets at this stage, we are not ready to move on. So be sure that you are fully aware and fully understand how the success looks like for a particular feature, for a specific stakeholder who is asking for it. The second pillar relates to rules. This is where most churn hides. I capture just a handful of policy statements with their IDs and, most critically, owners. If owner isn't clear, I stop with the refinement, because ambiguous ownership means shifting requirements later, and maybe having some delays in development. So these rule IDs become references in our acceptance criteria rules later, so quality assurance engineers can trace test back to the policy. For this specific feature, you can see just a snippet of the business rules I captured. 1 promo code per order. This is the business rule that was required by the marketing operations team. Moving to the second rule, we can see that there is like a category eligibility requirement, because we don't want, as a company, we don't want this promo code to be applied to all of the products in the cart, but just to some particular category. Moving to the third rule, we can see that explicit expire code error should appear on the screen for the user, so it's quite an obvious rule. At the same time, as a company, we don't want the discount to be applied to $1 cart, for example. We don't want to go bankrupt. So that's why we set this minimum cart amount for the discount to be applied. And we also have a constraint of the discount can be used just 1 time only. Moving to the next part, which is related to scenarios. Before we proceed with acceptance criteria, we need to align on the flow. And I just remind you that we can keep it format agnostic. So it's like whiteboard, simple flowchart, sequence diagram, whatever your team reads fastest, whatever your team understands and feels more confident in. So I tried to capture the main points here. As you can see, the user enters a promo code, then makes a call to promo code service. It's like done on the back end, right? And then we decide whether the minimum basket is met or not, and so on. So the main path here is that the shopper enters the code, the application calls the promo price service, gets a valid response, right? Gets a valid response and updates the total of the card because the discount is applied and marks one-time usage. So discount is applied and this is the end of the flow, the happy pass, so-called happy pass for the user. But at the same time, we understand that there are a few branches. For example, alternative path with the requirement of minimum basket not met. We should show the threshold message with maybe potentially some CTA adds a few more items to cart for the discount to be applied or something. So it's not the part where we define the solutioning, but it's just for us to understand the logic, how the service should work. At the same time, if the code is expired, so we should show the appropriate, the corresponding message on the screen so that the user understands that, that why this code wasn't applied. But at the same time, as a service, we should leave totals unchanged. One of the important parts here is related to system error when we have a timeout error because of something happened on the backend, for example. We should show a friendly message with something like, please retry later. And on the backend, we should avoid incorrect totals as well. But at the same time, we're logging this issue that this happened and alert for observability later. One of the interesting things here on the chart is the alternative flow, which is related to the user having ability of removing a promo code. Whether on the user action, so recalculation of the total should happen and make the code reusable if policy allows. Because if the promo code wasn't properly applied, and applied meant in our case when the customer finished the payment process, and the order was confirmed. Till that moment, if the code was entered, applied, but then removed, but the payment hasn't been done, we consider this promo code valid. So I tried to capture, maybe 10 or like 12 nodes maximum. So you can see the 3 lanes here. So the user, checkout, promo, and price service. As you can see, this is a quite, I would say, lightweight flow, and it can help the team grasp the understanding of a particular feature and its impact on the existing system in minutes, not in an hour, and it's important. We'll now reuse these branch names as rows in our AC matrix, so language stays consistent. Sorry, let's move on. So AC acceptance criteria matrix is our behavior contract. Each row expresses given, when, then, and references relevant rules, rule IDs, and includes explicit negative and error coverage. First, the happy path. So valid code meets the market minimum. We show the discount, recalculate the total, and mark usage. So as you can see, quite simple. Moving to the next point, we are talking about some obvious error when the code is expired. So we should return a specific message and leave total unchanged. Third, minimum not met because the amount of the card is below the threshold. So we should inform the customer with this helpful message and maybe add an CTA to add more items to the cart. 2 rows many teams forget. As I mentioned before, system failure, if pricing is down or slow, and there is a need for us to show a graceful error and avoid incorrect totals while logging and alerting, and an alternative path of removing the promo code. So you can see that QAs can lift these rows straight into tests. If we can't fill this table confidently, we go back to the rules or intents, so like to all the previous steps. And as you can see, all the steps, they depend on each other. So the higher you go, the higher the rigor, and the higher, the more complex your document should be. The fourth pillar helps us understand the readiness and make it measurable. So like quality gates relates first of all to non-functional requirements, where we set targets now, not after something was developed and built, because setting the targets for system behavior before the development is started is a good practice, so that engineering team can design for them and QA can measure them. So it's like I would say the right course of action. For this story, for this specific feature, you can see a few items mentioned for non-functional requirements, like a basic availability target and clear events for success and failure, and so on. Next, it's a good practice, a good moment where we can mention data examples. So you can see here, it's quite straightforward, because we just had one requirement related to some, I would say, specific data. It was related to the card amount and the currency. So that's why we have the first row related to the case which is below the threshold, at the threshold, and a different currency. So this kills ambiguity about calculations and rounding, so that you won't have a lot of questions later in the development from developers or even testers later in the process. With explicit non-functional requirements, data examples, we remove the biggest sources of UAT pain and I would say non-satisfied stakeholders, because we try to set all the set the expectations and set all the knowledge we have about specific feature, about stakeholders beforehand, and make sure we understand everything before we proceed to the development phase. Now it's the moment when we gathered all possible information, all possible requirements about the new feature. Now it's the moment we decide whether we are proceeding with the development or whether more analysis work is needed here. So it's a good, visual way to see go or no go gate point here. So we quickly verify the 4 pillars. So intent is clear. In our case, it's clear. Rules explicitly mentioned, and we have particular owners for each of the rules. Scenarios with happy, past, error cases, alternatives are captured, documented. At the same time, we have non-functional requirements recorded. We also mentioned a few data examples. We didn't find any dependencies, any, like, I would say, very important and risky dependencies just between the teams working on different services, but it is okay. We don't have any open questions here. So this is the moment where we can consider that when all the checks are green, when all the points are checked from this checklist, that this feature is approved to move to the development phase. And if something is not clear and we still feel that there are gaps, it means that something is red or unchecked. We should stop and fix it before we hand this feature to the development team. That's the BA's notion of done in action. So, and don't get me wrong, I don't say that we should do our analysis like in waterfall projects. And it just means for a BA to be able to capture as much information as possible and try to anticipate possible problems or I would say negative surprises in the future, so that we don't have rework or delays in the development. And by applying this lens and building these particular artifacts, you can have this shape this understanding inside of your own team, and also you can share these ideas and the knowledge you got from all these exercises with your stakeholders, so they also understand how that it is better to invest some time in the well done analysis than having some rework and some time or budget, sorry, time or budget constraints and risks later in the project. So now when you've seen all this framework, you've seen the example, you might be wondering, so how, because you see that this work isn't done just by purely BA. It involves a collaborative effort from all the development team members and the product owner, product managers. So I would like to show you a few benefits why this framework worth at least considering and maybe applying in the practice of your own projects. So first, you can see on the slide the developer. When the devs, they get sharper scope, they understand the overall, I would say boundaries of the feature or of the new requests, and they can see some potential, impacts on other parts of the system, and that they can build the new feature this way so that they take this into account. For them, it means less confusion and more straightforward development, faster code reviews when they are deep in work. At the same time, quality assurance engineers, they get basis for their tests later in the process, and they can explicitly see all the cases that they should cover, which are important from the business standpoint. At the same time, product owners, this framework, by applying this framework, they can see edge paths early for better slicing of their work, and they can also anticipate some potential alternatives of the process and have better prioritization for their specific, for maybe new requests or for specific tasks of this particular feature. And in general, the team, they get a repeatable way to declare done. It's not just a story, not just one-liner or a Jira ticket with some random description or a long text. They can, the team can experience fewer UAT surprises. They can have faster onboarding because the artifacts are living documentation, and the features, if you have new team members joining your team, you have also every decision captured, especially with this ready to build checklist. You can see all of the things grounded and based on something. So if it's not just highest paid person opinion that this feature should be must be in development and that's it, but you have you've done some analysis, you've captured some outcomes, and this documentation is ready for them to start reviewing before they start having and bringing their own effort and work to the project. So just for you have a picture of the key takeaways, I suggest you remember from the talk. Try to apply band framework or any other framework and not treat the BA work as just writing stories and moreover considering these stories, if they are written, that it means done. It's not. Only the specific, set of artifacts and this shared understanding that help you form this shared understanding inside the team. This is the done for BA work. I just want to highlight that. Also, you've seen this tiny toolkit of artifacts that help you build this shared understanding. They are all scaled by risk. So, and they are enough to cover all the 4 pillars, all the 4 perspectives, without writing heavy docs, which most probably no one will read, as practice shows. And with the gate, with this ready-to-build checklist, it makes readiness explicit and repeatable. And one of the important points I would like also to highlight here is one of the adoption tricks I used. So when I thought about this band framework, I didn't start creating all of the docs at once or trying to change the way how my team works. I just wanted to start small and then expand it when I saw that there was a progress. My team felt comfortable with these or that artifacts, and we had fewer UAT surprises. So, you should just think of it as starting small, maybe applying this band framework on medium or complexity story next sprint, just to see if applying one of the pillars and building one of the artifacts helps your team and overall helps your project and process, how you work and handle requirements. So thanks for joining. I hope you found these insights engaging, informative, and above all, which is one of the most important things for me, practical for your own projects. Now it's time for Q&A session, and I would be happy to hear your thoughts or questions. So feel free to share any experiences. Okay, so the first question, can you share a real life example where expanding done beyond user stories significantly improved delivery outcomes? Yeah, so this is like the one example I shared. That was specifically the I would say real project example when this done. I tried to have not to write just user stories because I felt that my value as a business analyst on the project was not valued as high as I would like to, and I wanted to contribute to the shared understanding. That's why I tried to conceptualize all the knowledge I had, all the understanding I had. That's why I invented this band framework and delivered these specific artifacts. So maybe I hope this answers your question. Yeah. The next one, which of the tools you mentioned has had the most impact on reducing misunderstanding in your teams? So definitely it was the visual flow and the acceptance criteria matrix for sure, because when I visualized the business logic of the application, everyone got this understanding just in seconds without, because previously we had a bad practice of trying to explain everything. It was just a long text and no one just literally just closed the story without even deep diving into the text, which I tried to put in good language, maybe highlighting some words, but it didn't help. But the moment when I visualized that, it just helped us see what doesn't work. Okay, the next question. How do you think business analysts should work with testers? Oh, I believe that they should collaborate very closely because, and I try on my project, I always try to invite testers to the phase when we get the new request from the stakeholders, because they can bring, their questioning nature to these conversations, and they always see some blind spots which business analysts even can miss, because business analysts mostly care about business part of the feature of the project, and they are care more about them, the users and the behavior and what the user see and the user experience in general. But at the same time, testers might have a bit different perspective, mostly focused on some technical parts, at least from my experience, and they help bring these questions early on in the process before we even commit to delivering any of the features. That's a great practice. Okay, so it seems that's all of the questions. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, and feel free to watch the recording on YouTube and Facebook of the event. So thanks everyone. See you. Bye.